The stone is 8 meters tall. It stands on the Spirit Road at Qianling, the tomb complex where Zetian is buried with the Emperor Gaozong. Every other Tang emperor has an inscribed stele on his tomb avenue. This one is blank. No inscription was ever carved. No eulogy, no biography, no list of achievements. The surface was prepared for text and then left empty. It is the only uncarved imperial stele in Chinese history. The blankness is a fact. The reason for it is not. Subscribe to Dynasty and Dust for long-form documentary history about the people who lived inside great wealth and the systems that kept it running. No surviving document records whether Zetian asked for an empty stele, whether her son, the restored Emperor Gaozong, chose it, or whether a later court could not agree on what to say. The stone stands at the end of a tomb avenue lined with stone figures. Guardians, horses, winged horses, and foreign envoys in carved stone face the burial mound on both sides. The avenue was built for 2 emperors. The mound holds both. One of them had been born a woman. The other had been her husband and her instrument. The tomb joins them. The stele speaks for neither. Qianling is the only Tang imperial tomb that survived the centuries without large-scale looting. A tunnel cut into the mountain by later grave robbers collapsed before reaching the inner chamber. The tomb remains sealed. What the avenue shows, the stone figures and the blank stele, is what the court built for public viewing. What the sealed chamber contains is known only from the excavation reports that confirmed its location and its unbreached condition. The blank stele faces a second stele across the same avenue. The second stele, the one erected for Gaozong, carries a full inscription. It was composed by Zetian herself. The text survives in fragments. It praises Gaozong's virtue, records his accomplishments, and fulfills the ritual obligation a surviving sovereign owed to a deceased emperor. The inscription she wrote for her husband is documented. The inscription for herself is absent. To ask why the stone is blank is to ask what Zetian did that no one before her had done and no one after her would repeat. She was born into a system that placed women inside households at the pleasure of men. She died having held the title of emperor in her own name, having founded her own dynasty, and having ruled for 15 years as the sovereign of the largest empire on earth. Then the dynasty she founded was erased from the succession. The title she held was reduced to the one the system had always preferred for women: Empress, not emperor. The stone does not explain any of this. It simply refuses to say. The woman who would become the only female emperor in Chinese history entered the record around the year 624. Her given name was Zhao. The character Zhao she later chose for herself was a rare one, a word for the light of the sun and moon combined, a name she selected when she was already emperor. The name she was born with is not recorded. The sources call her Wu Mainyang, Lady of Perfect Charm, a name the court gave her when she entered the palace. Her father, Wu Shihuo, had begun as a timber merchant in the province of Bingzhou, a man who traded wood rather than commanding troops. The province sat in what is now Shanxi, on the northern frontier where the agricultural empire met the pastoral peoples of the steppe. Timber from the northern forests was a commodity the Tang economy consumed in quantity. A merchant who controlled timber supply operated at the edge of the political world, close enough to see how power worked, far enough from the center to lack it. When Li Yuan rose against the Sui dynasty in 617 and founded the Tang, Wu Shihuo joined him. The decision to support a rebellion was a gamble. If Li Yuan failed, Wu Shihuo would lose everything. If he succeeded, a merchant could become something the old aristocracy would never have allowed. Li Yuan succeeded. Wu Shihuo became a general. He was ennobled as Duke of Ying. He received land, rank, and a place in the new military aristocracy that the Tang created from its own supporters. Wu Shihuo's military career after the founding took him through a series of provincial postings. He served as garrison commander in Lizhou and later held commands in the central provinces. The sources name him as a man who maintained discipline among his troops and kept the roads near his postings open. His relationship to the Li family was one of personal loyalty cemented by the founding, not the inherited bond of the old aristocracy. He attended the court when summoned and commanded troops where assigned. He was not a strategist. He was a reliable commander who held the territory he was given. The sources record his death occurring around the year 635, when Wu Zhao was approximately 12 years old. She was still a child. His death removed the family's direct connection to the new aristocracy. A duke's title could pass to a son, but Wu Shihuo's sons did not inherit the influence their father had built. Lady Yang, his widow from the Sui imperial clan, raised their daughter alone. The family had lost its anchor. A household led by a widow from a fallen dynasty occupied a different position than one led by an ennobled general. The father's death shifted the family from the margin of the new elite to the edge of the old one. The merchant who had traded timber became a man whose daughter could enter the imperial household. That transformation was the foundation of everything that followed. Without the rebellion, without the gamble, without the new dynasty's need to promote its early backers, Wu Zhao would never have been eligible for court service. The Tang did not draw its consorts from the old aristocracy alone. It drew them from the families of its own supporters. Wu Shihuo's support of Li Yuan was the door his daughter walked through. Her mother came from a different world. Lady Yang was of the Sui imperial clan, the family that had ruled China before the Tang replaced them. The marriage between a newly ennobled Tang general and a woman from the fallen dynasty was not unusual for the period. It bound new power to old name. The Tang needed the cooperation of Sui-era elites, and marriage was one of the mechanisms that secured it. But the match also placed their daughter between two social identities that the Tang court could distinguish sharply. The father was a man whose wealth came from trade before it came from war. The mother carried the blood of emperors who no longer ruled. The Tang aristocracy was not a single class. It was a hierarchy that separated old landed families from new military households, northern from southern lineages, and hereditary privilege from service-based advancement. The great clans of the Shandong region The Cui, Lu, Li, and Zhang families traced their lineages back centuries and married among themselves. The Tang imperial family, the Li, was technically one of them, but the Tang emperors promoted a different principle. They argued that rank should follow service, not birth. Taizong himself attempted to reorder the aristocratic rankings to reflect contribution to the dynasty rather than inherited status. The attempt met resistance. The old families did not accept the new ordering easily. Wu Shihuo's family sat in the middle of this tension. They were not old aristocracy. They were not imperial clan. They were a family that had risen through the specific mechanism the Tang promoted, service to the founding emperor, and they carried the additional mark of a merchant background that the old aristocracy would have considered disqualifying. Wu Zhao grew up between these categories. The sources do not record how she experienced the tension, but the structure of her origin meant that she entered the court with a name that was neither old enough to command automatic respect, nor new enough to stand without explanation. That name carried both advantage and burden. The Tang court that Wu Zhao entered was the court of the Emperor Taizong, the second Tang emperor. Taizong had not inherited the throne peacefully. In 626, he ambushed and killed his brothers Li Jiancheng and Li Yuanji at the Xuanwu Gate in Chang'an. He then compelled his father, the founding Emperor Gaozong, to name him crown prince and abdicate. The Xuanwu Gate incident was the founding violence of Taizong's reign. He ruled for 23 years and made the Tang the dominant power in East Asia. His reign is called the Zhengguan era, a period remembered for competent administration, territorial expansion, and institutional consolidation. Around 637, when Wu Zhao was approximately 12 or 13 years old, she entered Taizong's palace as a cairen. The title translates loosely as Lady of Talents. It was the 5th rank among the emperor's consorts, a position that carried proximity to the emperor but little security. The consorts were graded on a scale that ranked them from the Empress down through 9 tiers. An Empress stood at the top, followed by 4 consorts of the 1st rank, 9 women of the 2nd rank, and further tiers descending. A cairen held the 5th rank. She had access to the emperor's presence, but no guarantee of continuing access. Her position depended on his continued interest and on whether she bore a child. If she did, she might rise. If she did not, her future was uncertain. The 9 tiers were not ceremonial. They determined quarters, clothing, food allowances, and the number of attendants assigned to each woman. A 1st-rank consort might have a household of her own, with a dozen servants and a private garden. A 5th-rank consort like Wu Zhao had a smaller establishment, a room within a hall shared with women of similar rank, and a daily routine structured around the possibility of being summoned. The days followed a rhythm set by the court calendar. Mornings began with washing and dressing according to rank. The higher a woman's tier, the finer the silk, and the more elaborate the headdress she was permitted to wear. Meals were served in portions graded by rank. A consort at the 5th level ate adequately, but without the variety and abundance allotted to the women above her. The ranking system among the women mirrored the ranking among officials in the outer court. Both rested on the same principle: Position defined access. Access defined opportunity. A consort rose or fell by the same logic that governed a secretary's career. Favor, proximity, and usefulness to the man at the center determined both. The inner palace was the outer court's mirror, with the emperor as the shared pivot. The palace compound at Chang'an was vast. The city itself was among the largest in the medieval world, its walls enclosing an area of roughly 80 square kilometers. Within those walls, the palace occupied its own walled precinct. The compound held the outer court where officials conducted the business of government, and the inner palace where the emperor's household lived. The two were separated by gates that only a small number of men could pass. The separation was physical and institutional. Officials worked in halls and offices on the outer side. The consorts, their children, and their attendants lived on the inner side. The compound housed thousands of people at any given time: officials, scribes, guards, cooks, stable hands, eunuchs, and the women of the household, all living within its walls. The population of the palace was larger than that of many towns. A woman who entered as a consort entered an institution that contained an entire social order, compressed into a single enclosure and governed by rules she could not alter. The consorts lived inside the palace compound, a walled city within Chang'an that housed the emperor's household, his officials, his guards, and the administrative offices of government. The palace was not a residence in the modern sense. It was an institution. The women who entered it as consorts entered an organization with rules, ranks, duties, and hierarchies that governed every aspect of daily life. They could not leave without permission. They could not communicate freely with the outside world. Their families could visit under controlled conditions, but the women themselves belonged to the household they had entered. The sources do not record what Wu Zhao did during Taizong's reign. The Tang Shu, the Old Tang history, compiled in 945, notes her entry into the palace and gives her the informal name Mainyang. The Zizhu Tongjian, the comprehensive chronicle compiled by Sima Guang in 1084, adds little more. The Xin Tang Shu, the New Tang history compiled by Ouyang Shu in 1060, is no fuller. No source records her conversations, her daily routines, her relationship with Taizong, or any political activity during the 12 years she spent in his palace. She served as a fifth-rank consort. She did not bear a child. The absence of evidence for this period is not unusual. The Tang histories record consorts only at moments of political consequence: when they enter, when they give birth, when they are promoted, when they are deposed, and when they die. Wu Zhao did none of these during Taizong's reign. She entered, she served, she remained at the fifth rank. The silence of the sources reflects the silence of the system. A consort who did not bear a child and did not attract the emperor's sustained attention had no story the official record considered worth telling. In the 6th month of 649, Taizong died. The system that had given Wu Zhao her position now removed it. An emperor's consorts who had not borne children were sent to Buddhist monasteries. This was not punishment. It was the institutional mechanism for closing the household of a dead emperor. The consorts could not return to their families. They could not marry. They entered monasteries and spent the remainder of their lives as Buddhist nuns. Their heads shaved, their robes changed, their daily routines reorganized around monastic practice. The Tang dynasty had a complex relationship with Buddhism. Taizong himself was not a devout Buddhist, but the religion held deep cultural and political significance in the early Tang. Monasteries received land, patronage, and legal privileges. The court used Buddhist institutions for diplomatic purposes, hosting foreign monks and translating sutras. The practice of sending former consorts to monasteries fit within this broader institutional landscape. A woman who had served the emperor and was no longer needed was placed in an institution that could absorb her without threatening the political order. The monastery was a container for women the palace could no longer hold, and the family could not reclaim. Zhao entered Ganye Temple. She was approximately 25 years old. Her position as cairen had ended with the death of the man who had placed her there. Her future, as the system defined it, was the monastery. She had entered the palace through a door that depended on a man. She had left through a door that the same man's death had opened. The system had no third option. Ganye Temple was not a remote hermitage. It was a functioning monastery in or near the capital region, staffed by ordained nuns and supported by the same patronage networks that sustained other Tang Buddhist institutions. The women who entered it as former consorts lived alongside nuns who had chosen monastic life for other reasons. The daily routine was structured by monastic rules: morning prayers, sutra recitation, communal meals, and the maintenance of the temple grounds. The sources do not record Zhao's experience of this routine. They record only that she was there, and then that she was not. The emperor who succeeded Taizong was his son, Li Ji, who took the temple name Gaozong. Gaozong had been present at Taizong's court during the last years of his father's reign. He was 21 when he became emperor. Whether he had noticed Zhao before Taizong's death is a question the sources answer differently. The Zhu Tang Shu, compiled closer to the events and generally more cautious in its claims, does not assert a prior attachment. The Ziji Tongjian and the Xin Tang Shu, both compiled centuries later under stronger Confucian editorial frameworks, report that Gaozong had been attracted to her while she was still in Taizong's palace. The later sources may be constructing the story retrospectively, building a causal narrative that explains the recall by attributing desire to an earlier moment. The earlier source does not confirm this. What the sources agree on is the outcome. Around 650, approximately 1 year after Taizong's death, Zhao was recalled from Ganye Temple to the palace. Gaozong brought her back. She was given the rank of Zhao Yi, the second rank among consorts, a significant elevation from her previous position as cairen. The jump from 5th to 2nd rank was not a minor promotion. It placed her near the top of the consort hierarchy, below only the Empress and the 4 first-rank consorts. The mechanism of the recall is not consistently reported. Some sources say Gaozong encountered her during a memorial visit to the temple and was moved by the sight of her. Others suggest that the Empress Wang, Gaozong's childless wife, encouraged the recall to offset the influence of another consort, Xiao, who had borne a son. Both explanations may be partially correct. Gaozong may have wanted Wu Zhao back. Empress Wang may have seen the recall as useful to her own position. Neither needed to know what the other intended. The system allowed multiple motivations to converge on the same outcome. Empress Wang had married Gaozong before he became emperor. She was the daughter of a senior official and came from a family with strong court connections. She had not borne a child. In the Tang court, an empress without a son occupied a vulnerable position. Her security depended on the emperor's continued preference and on the absence of a rival who could produce a male heir. Consort Zhao had borne a son, Li Sujie, and had gained influence accordingly. Wang saw Wu Zhao, newly recalled from the monastery and without a son of her own, as a counterweight she could use against Zhao. The strategy was rational within the system's logic. A childless empress who could not produce an heir could at least introduce a rival who might dilute the influence of the one who had. What Wang did not anticipate was that the woman she brought back would displace her within 4 years. The system that pitted women against each other for reproductive success and political survival did not reward the woman who introduced the rival. It rewarded the woman who won. At this point in the record, Wu Zhao is a woman of approximately 26 who has spent her entire adult life inside a system that defines a woman's position by her relationship to a man. She has been a cairen under one emperor and a Zhao Yi under another. She has spent time in a monastery. She has no recorded political role. She has no independent power base. She has no child, yet. The question the blank Stele poses is not how she survived this system. Many women survived it. The question is how she came to command it. How does a woman who enters the palace as a 5th-rank concubine, whose every position is granted by a man, become the only person in 3,000 years of imperial history to take the title of emperor in her own name? The system she entered did not design a path from cairen to huangdi. No such path existed. The system had ranks for consorts, ranks for empresses, ranks for dowagers. It had no rank for a woman who ruled as sovereign. When Wu Zhao took that title in 690, she did not climb a ladder the system had built. She made a ladder the system had refused to imagine. The blank stele at Qianling may be the only honest monument to what she did. It carries no inscription because the language to describe what she had done did not exist in a form that the system could accept. The Confucian historiographical tradition that wrote the histories called her reign an anomaly. The Buddhist establishment that justified her rule provided ideological tools she used and then set aside. The officials she promoted served her and then restored the dynasty she had interrupted. No faction could compose an epitaph that the others would accept. The stone remained blank. But the stone is not the beginning of the story. It is the end. The beginning is a timber merchant's daughter entering a palace at 12, with no recorded name beyond the charm the court assigned her, through a door that opened because a man decided she should enter. Every position she held for the first half of her life was given to her by someone with the power to take it back. The question is when that changed and how. The answer begins with a rivalry she did not create. Empress Wang had no son. Consort Zhao had a son. Wang saw Wu Zhao as a weapon she could aim at Zhao. She encouraged Gaozong to promote the woman he had recalled from the monastery, expecting gratitude and influence in return. What she got was a rival who displaced her within 4 years. The rivalry that followed is the machinery of the story. It is not a story of sexual manipulation. It is a story of a system that placed women in competition for reproductive success and political survival, and of one woman who understood the system better than the others. The court that pitted Wang against Zhao against Wu was a court where a woman's security depended on bearing a son, and a woman's power depended on being indispensable to the emperor. Wu Zhao would prove to be both. But first, the system would demand a price that the sources still cannot fully resolve. The court Wu Zhao returned to in 650 was a court organized around the production of heirs. An empress without a son was an empress without security. A consort with a son was a consort with a future. The system did not ask whether the women wanted to compete. It placed them in competition by defining their worth through reproduction. Empress Wang had married Gaozong before he became emperor. She came from a family with deep court connections, the Wang clan of Taiyuan, a lineage the old aristocracy recognized. She had been chosen for Gaozong by senior officials, including Jiangsun Wuji, the emperor's uncle and the most powerful minister at court. The marriage was a political arrangement. It bound the emperor to a family the establishment trusted. Wang had not borne a child. The sources do not explain why. They record only the fact and its consequence. An empress without a son was vulnerable. The Wang clan of Taiyuan stood at the apex of the Tang aristocracy. The great families of the period were ranked by region. The Wang of Taiyuan occupied one of the highest positions in that hierarchy. Their prestige predated the Tang dynasty by centuries. They had produced officials, ministers, and consorts across multiple dynasties. A daughter of the Wang clan carried the weight of that lineage into any marriage. Her union with Gaozong, then a prince, was arranged by Jiangsun Wuji. The arrangement was part of a broader strategy to bind the throne to the old aristocratic families. Jiangsun Wuji was the Emperor Taizong's brother-in-law. He was the senior figure in the Regency Council appointed to guide Gaozong after Taizong's death. His choice of Wang reflected the council's preference for a bride whose family connections would reinforce the existing political order. The council wanted an empress whose loyalty to the established structure was guaranteed by her bloodline. Wang met that requirement. As empress, she presided over the inner palace. She managed the hierarchy of consorts. She controlled access to the emperor's private quarters. She directed the female staff who maintained the palace's daily operations. Her authority was real but bounded. It extended to the women of the palace and the servants who served them. It did not extend to the ministries, the military, or the fiscal apparatus. An empress without a son held her rank at the pleasure of the emperor and the tolerance of the senior officials whose support had placed her there. Wang had no faction among the ministers. She had no ally in the inner palace beyond the officials who had chosen her. Her position depended on a structure of patronage that could withdraw its support the moment her usefulness ended. The structure had placed her there to reproduce. She had not reproduced. The gap between her function and her performance was widening, and the court knew it. The court did not act on that knowledge immediately. The structures of rank and privilege moved slowly. Wang retained her title. She retained her apartments. She retained the ceremonial role that her position required. What she did not retain was the confidence of the officials who had placed her there. Consort Zhao had borne a son, Li Sujie, and had gained the influence that came with having produced a potential heir. She held the rank of Shufei, the second of the 4 first-rank consorts, a position above Wu Zhao's newly assigned rank of Zhao Yi. Zhao's proximity to Gaozong and her success in producing a son made her the woman Wang needed to displace. Wang's strategy was to introduce a rival. She encouraged Gaozong to recall Wu Zhao from Ganye Temple and to promote her to Zhao Yi, a rank close to Zhao's but below it. The calculation was straightforward. If Wu Zhao attracted Gaozong's attention, Zhao would lose it. If Wu Zhao bore a son, Zhao's son would not be the only male heir in the household. And if Wu Zhao was grateful to Wang for the recall, Wang would have an ally against Zhao. The calculation failed because it underestimated the woman it was meant to use. Wu Zhao bore her first son, Li Hong, in 652, within 2 years of her return. The birth gave her something Wang did not have, and something Zhao had, a male child. The court that had been a contest between a childless empress and a consort with one son became a contest between a childless empress, a consort with one son, and a consort with one son, who was not the childless empress's ally. The rivalry that followed was conducted through the mechanisms the court provided. Access to the emperor was the primary mechanism. A consort who could see the emperor privately could influence his decisions, his appointments, and his view of other women. A consort who lost access lost everything. The sources record that Wu Zhao gained Gaozong's preference, and that Wang and Zhao lost it. They do not record how this was accomplished in daily practice. The later sources attribute the shift to Wu Zhao's charm and intelligence. The earlier sources note the outcome without assigning a mechanism. What the evidence supports is that Gaozong's preference moved from Wang and Zhao to Wu, and that the movement was rapid. Then the record reaches the event it cannot resolve. In late 653 or early 654, Wu Zhao bore a daughter. The infant died. The Zizhi Tongjian records that Wu Zhao accused Empress Wang of strangling the child after Wang had visited Wu Zhao's chamber. The accusation, if true, would have been an act of desperate rivalry. Wang had motive. She was losing the emperor's preference and had no son to secure her position. A dead infant belonging to her rival removed a future competitor. The Xin Tang Shu, compiled later with a stronger editorial stance against Wu, implies that Wu Zhao killed her own daughter to frame Wang. The implication is not stated as fact. It is built into the narrative arrangement, the choice of detail, and the editorial framing that the Xintang Shu uses throughout its treatment of Wu. The Jiutang Shu, compiled closer to the events and generally more cautious, records the death of the infant and the deposition of Wang, but does not assign guilt for the killing. The reason the sources differ is partly chronological and partly editorial. The Zhu Tang Shu was compiled in 945. Its compilers worked from Tang court records that were closer to the events. They reproduced the language of the archive. They did not add moral commentary. Their institutional position was clear. They were scholars preserving a dynasty's record. The Ziji Tongjian was compiled in 1084 by Sima Guang. His framework treated illegitimate rule as a corruption of political order. His work was designed to instruct rulers. It showed the consequences of moral failure. A woman who seized the throne was, in his framework, a lesson in what happened when the proper order was overturned. The Xin Tang Shu was compiled by Ouyang Shu in 1060. Its moralizing stance reorganized the Tang record. It made virtue and vice more legible. Ouyang Shu believed the earlier histories had been too lenient. He rewrote them. He made the moral character of each figure clearer. The pattern is consistent. The later the source, the more hostile the framing of Wu Zhao becomes. The earlier source's silence does not exonerate her. It reflects a different editorial standard. That standard reproduced what the archive said. It left the rest unsaid. The later sources had motive. They had editorial latitude. They filled the silence with the judgment the archive had withheld. The result is a record in which the same event is described three ways. All three must be held in mind. The evidence does not resolve the question. A mother accused of killing her own child is a charge that requires proof the sources do not provide. A woman strangling a rival's infant is a charge that requires the same proof. The Confucian historiographical tradition, which considered female rule a violation of cosmic order, had motive to present Wu Zhao in the worst possible light. The later sources are not neutral, but the earlier source, which is generally more measured, does not exonerate her either. It simply does not say. What happened is that an infant died. The court treated the death as a crime, not a natural loss. Empress Wang was accused. The accusation, whether true or fabricated, was sufficient. Wang could not defend herself against a charge of killing an emperor's child inside the palace, where the only witnesses were the women who lived there and the servants who served them. The sources agree on what followed. In the 10th month of 655, both Empress Wang and Consort Zhao were deposed. They were executed. The fact of execution is recorded in the Zhou Tang Shu, the Zizhu Tongjian, and the Xin Tang Shu. No source disputes it. The method of execution is recorded in the later sources with a detail the earlier source omits. The Ziji Tongjian and the Xin Tang Shu report that Wu Zhao ordered their hands and feet cut off and their bodies placed in wine jars. The Ziji Tongjian records that Wu Zhao called them human pigs. The Zhu Tang Shu confirms the execution but does not describe the method in these terms. The discrepancy matters. The Zhu Tang Shu was compiled in 945, approximately 300 years after the events, using Tang court records that were closer to the original period. The Zizhu Tongjian was compiled in 1084, over 400 years after the events, by Sima Guang, a scholar whose editorial framework was explicitly hostile to illegitimate rule. The Xin Tang Shu, compiled by Ouyang Shu in 1060, was even more explicitly moralizing in its treatment of Wu. The specific mutilation appears in the later, more hostile sources. It does not appear in the earlier, more measured one. The execution happened. The specific cruelty attributed to it may be historical or may be editorial embellishment by later sources that had both motive and opportunity to make Wu Zhao appear as monstrous as possible. The narration cannot determine which. What the narration can do is state what each source records and what it does not, and let the discrepancy stand. In the same month that Wang and Xiao were executed, Wu Zhao was elevated to Empress. The promotion was not a private matter. It required the support of senior officials. Shu Jingzong, a minister who had survived multiple political purges and who understood the direction of Gaozong's preference, advocated the elevation. Li Ji, the senior general who had conquered Goguryeo, and whose opinion carried military weight, endorsed it with a single recorded statement that this was a family matter, not a state matter. The statement, whether genuine or apocryphal, removed the military establishment's objection. Zhang Sun Wuji, the emperor's uncle and the most powerful opponent of the elevation, was not consulted or was overruled. The political mechanics of the elevation reveal something the sexual rivalry narrative obscures. Wu Zhao did not become empress because Gaozong loved her. She became empress because a faction of senior officials calculated that supporting her elevation was more advantageous than opposing it. Shu Jingzong wanted the credit of having backed the winning side. Li Ji wanted to keep the military out of what he saw as a palace dispute. Gaozong wanted the woman he preferred as empress. Each had different reasons. The outcome served all three. The woman who benefited was the one whose position all three calculations converged on. Wu Zhao was now empress. She had a son. She had the emperor's preference. She had the support of ministers who had calculated that her elevation was in their interest. What she did not have was the one thing the system could not give her through the mechanisms it had used so far. She did not have independent administrative authority. An empress could influence. She could not govern. The door that opened to let her govern was not one she had to force. It was one the emperor's body broke open. Beginning around 660, Gaozong began to suffer episodes that the sources describe as wind disease, a term that covered a range of conditions involving dizziness, impaired vision, and periodic inability to attend to business. The modern diagnosis is not recoverable. The sources describe a condition that made it difficult for the emperor to read memorials, attend audiences, and make decisions for extended periods. The episodes recurred. They did not kill him. They made him dependent on someone who could handle the work he could not. Wind disease in Tang medical understanding was a category broader than any single modern diagnosis. The term covered conditions involving the head, the circulation, and the nervous system. Physicians of the period classified it among the disorders caused by external pathogenic forces entering the body. Wind was one of the 6 pathogenic factors in Tang medical theory. It was understood to enter the body through the pores and the meridians, disrupting the flow of qi and producing symptoms that moved and recurred without fixed pattern. The symptoms the sources attribute to Gaozong include dizziness, blurred vision, headaches, and episodes of partial paralysis, affecting his ability to speak or attend to business. These recurred across decades. They did not kill him. They disabled him for stretches that lasted days and sometimes weeks. During those stretches, the administrative work of the empire continued. Memorials arrived from the provinces. Military reports came from the frontiers. Fiscal accounts required review and authorization. Appointment decisions waited for the emperor's approval. Petitions from local officials demanded response. When Gaozong could not perform these tasks, Wu Zhao performed them. She read the memorials and summarized their contents. She drafted the responses that went out under his name. She managed the appointment process for officials at and above the 5th rank. She oversaw the fiscal system that drew revenue from the land tax, the household tax, and the labor service obligation. She reviewed military dispatches and coordinated the flow of orders to regional commanders. These were not ceremonial functions. They were the substantive work of governing the largest state in the world at that time. A consort who could perform this work was not a consort. She was a function the empire required and could not do without. The illness that made Gaozong unreliable made Wu Zhao indispensable. Wu Zhao began to manage memorials and administrative business during Gaozong's episodes. The Zhu Tang Shu records that she reviewed documents, drafted responses, and presented decisions for Gaozong's approval. The arrangement was not unprecedented. Empresses and dowagers had performed administrative functions for incapacitated emperors before. What was unprecedented was the speed and thoroughness with which Wu Zhao moved from auxiliary help to effective co-rule. She was competent. The sources, even the hostile ones, do not deny her administrative ability. She could read and process large volumes of official correspondence. She understood the institutional structure of the Tang bureaucracy. She knew which officials were reliable and which were not. She could make decisions about appointments, military campaigns, and fiscal policy. These were not skills the concubine system was designed to teach. They were skills she had acquired. The sources do not say how. During the years between her return from Ganye Temple and Gaozong's illness, whether she studied the administrative system on her own or learned it through Gaozong's tutelage is not recorded. What the evidence shows is that when the emperor could not work, she could, and did. The arrangement was not unchallenged. In 664, approximately 4 years after Wu Zhao began handling administrative business, Gaozong attempted to depose her. The episode is known as the Shangguanyi affair. Gaozong, reportedly resentful of Wu Zhao's dominance over administrative affairs, summoned the official Shangguanyi and ordered him to draft an edict of deposition. Shangguanyi was a senior official with a reputation for literary skill and political independence. He drafted the edict. The sources record that Wu Zhao learned of the draft before it was issued. She confronted Gaozong. Gaozong, according to the Ziji Tongjian, retreated, blamed Shangguanyi, and canceled the deposition. The exact sequence is debated. Whether Gaozong genuinely intended to depose Wu Zhao or was testing the political waters is not clear from the sources. What is clear is the outcome. Shangguan Yi was executed. The edict was not issued. Wu Zhao remained Empress and remained in control of administrative business. After the Shangguan Yi affair, the sources record that Gaozong never again attempted to remove her. The execution of Shangguan Yi did not end with him. His son Shangguan Tingzhi was also killed. His family was enslaved. His property was confiscated. The standard punishment for officials convicted of treason extended to their households. Wives, children, and close relatives shared the condemned man's fate. The logic was preventive. A family that might seek vengeance was removed before it could. Yet one member of the Shangguan household survived. Shangguan Yi's granddaughter, Shangguan Heir, was an infant at the time of the execution. She was spared along with her mother and entered the inner palace as a slave. She would grow up inside the institution that had destroyed her family. She would later become one of Wu Zhao's most capable officials. She drafted edicts. She managed palace documents. She served as a literary advisor and a secretary whose writing the court relied on for formal pronouncements. Her position gave her influence over the language of imperial decrees for decades. The woman who ordered her grandfather's death would become the employer who recognized her talent and promoted her. The sources record these facts without drawing the contrast. The contrast does not require commentary to be visible. A family destroyed by one generation of power would be absorbed into the service of the next. The system that killed Shangguan Yi would train his granddaughter to serve the woman who killed him. Wu Zhao did not punish the family twice. She used what the punishment had left. The talent that survived the execution was the talent she would employ. Heir was not yet 5 years old when she entered the palace. She had no memory of the events that had placed her there. She would grow up knowing only the institution that had consumed her family and the woman who ran it. The phrase the sources use for the period after the Shangguan Yi affair is the two sages. Gaozong and Wu Zhao were referred to jointly at court. When officials submitted memorials, they addressed them to both. When the court held audiences, both sat behind the screen. The title was informal, but the practice it described was real. The empire had two rulers. One was the emperor. The other was the empress, who had been a fifth-rank concubine 13 years earlier. The two sages period was not a period of passive coexistence. It was a period of active military expansion and administrative reform. The most significant military achievement of the joint reign was the conquest of Goguryeo, the Korean kingdom that had resisted Tang campaigns since Taizong's time. The final campaign began in 660 and ended in 668, when the Tang armies captured Pyongyang and incorporated the Korean peninsula into the Tang sphere of influence. The Goguryeo campaign mattered for two reasons. First, it demonstrated that the joint administration could direct complex military operations across extended supply lines and multiple campaigning seasons. The campaign required coordination between the Tang armies, the Tang navy, and the allied kingdom of Stele. It required fiscal resources, troop movements, and diplomatic management. The fact that the two sages period produced a successful outcome on this scale is evidence that the administrative system Wu Zhao had built was not merely functional but effective. Second, the campaign connected to the internal politics of the court in ways that mattered for Wu Zhao's position. The general who commanded the final phase of the Goguryeo campaign, Li Ji, was the same official who had endorsed Wu Zhao's elevation to Empress with his statement that the matter was a family affair. Li Ji's military prestige and his political reliability gave Wu Zhao the backing of the senior military establishment. A woman who had the support of the general who conquered Goguryeo had a power base that did not depend on the emperor's bed or the emperor's desk. It depended on the army. The Tang bureaucracy during this period was not a passive instrument. It was a complex organization with its own internal politics, factional alignments, and institutional interests. The officials who served the two sages were men who had passed through the civil service examination system, been recommended by senior officials, or inherited their positions through aristocratic privilege. They owed their positions to different mechanisms and had different loyalties. Some were loyal to the Tang imperial house, the Li clan. Some were loyal to the ministerial factions that had placed them. Some were loyal to whoever held effective power, which after 664 meant Wu Zhao. The factional landscape of the court had changed since the beginning of Gaozong's reign. Zhangsun Wuji, the emperor's uncle and the dominant minister in the early years, had been removed from power in 659. He was exiled and ordered to commit suicide. The purge of Zhangsun Wuji removed the most powerful opponent of Wu Zhao's elevation and the last senior official who could have challenged her position from within the old establishment. His removal was not Wu Zhao's alone. Gaozong had his own reasons to want his uncle's influence reduced, but the outcome served Wu Zhao's interests. The old ministerial establishment that had opposed her was broken. The new officials who replaced it owed their positions to the two sages, not to the old aristocratic networks. The system that Wu Zhao now helped to govern was the largest imperial state in the world at the time. The Tang Empire stretched from the Korean peninsula in the east to the borders of Persia in the west, from the steppe frontier in the north to the tropical south. It governed tens of millions of people through a bureaucracy that relied on the examination system, the recommendation system, and the inherited prestige of great families. The fiscal system drew revenue from land taxes, household taxes, and labor service. The military system combined professional soldiers, conscript militias, and frontier garrisons commanded by regional commanders. The administration of this empire, during Gaozong's episodes of incapacity, fell to Wu Zhao because there was no one else who could do it. Gaozong could not. The crown prince, Li Hong, was a child. The senior ministers had been reshuffled enough that no single official had the breadth of authority to run the government alone. Wu Zhao had spent years learning the system, building relationships with the officials who ran it, and demonstrating that she could make decisions the system accepted. The two sages was not a coup. It was a recognition by the court that the Empress had become the person who could keep the machinery running when the emperor could not. The machinery that brought Wu Zhao to power was not the bed. The concubine system gave her access. The rivalry with Wang and Zhao gave her an opening. The birth of Li Hong gave her a son. But the machinery that kept her in power was the desk. When the emperor could not read the memorials, she could. When the emperor could not decide who to appoint, she could. When the emperor tried to remove her, she had enough institutional control to prevent it, and enough political skill to make the attempt fail. The first explanation for her rise, that she was a woman who used sexual access to manipulate a weak emperor, is not sufficient. Gaozong was not weak in 660. He was ill. The illness created a vacancy. Wu Zhao filled it with administrative competence that the sources, including the hostile ones, acknowledge. The bed opened the door. The desk kept it open. But the desk was not enough to explain what came next. The two sages arrangement was still an arrangement between an emperor and an empress. Wu Zhao held power through Gaozong's tolerance and through the institutional habit of addressing memorials to both. She did not hold it in her own name. She did not hold it through a title that recognized her as sovereign rather than as the emperor's wife. The question this section has answered is how Wu Zhao moved from rival to empress to co-ruler. The question it leaves standing is how she moved from co-ruler to emperor. The answer to that question requires the death of the man whose illness had given her the desk, and the creation of a title the system had never offered to a woman. Before that answer arrives, the system will demonstrate that it can give power and take it back. The emperor whose strokes had opened the door to administrative power would die. The son who succeeded him would be demoted within weeks. The throne would pass to another son who never held it, and the woman who had been running the empire for over 20 years would decide that the title empress was not enough. The Emperor Gaozong died in the 12th month of 683. He had ruled for 34 years. For the last 20 of those years, the effective administration of the empire had been in the hands of the woman who now became Dowager Empress. The title she received at Gaozong's death was huangdi, Empress Dowager. It was the highest title the system offered to a woman who had been the wife of a dead emperor. It was not the title of a ruler. The title huangdi was one stage in a longer progression. Earlier, in 674, Gaozong and Wu Zhao had adopted the titles Heavenly Emperor and Heavenly Empress, Tian Huang and Tian Ho. The joint designation formalized the two sages arrangement, under which the court acknowledged that two rulers governed rather than one. Wu Zhao had held the title Huang Ho, Empress, since her installation in 655. The progression from Huang Ho to Tian Ho to huangdi Ho and finally to huangdi traces the institutional trajectory of her power. Each title corresponded to a real expansion of authority. Each was granted or claimed through recognized procedure. None was invented from nothing. The two sages period had its own practical machinery. Edicts were issued under both names. Audiences were conducted with both sovereigns present. The court memorialists recorded the years from 674 to 683 as a period of joint rule, not of regency or substitution. The distinction mattered. A regent acted in the name of another. The two sages acted in their own names. Gaozong's declining health, described in the sources as a disease of the head and eyes that impaired his vision, made the arrangement necessary. Wu Zhao did not seize the function. She was given it. The court accepted the transfer because the alternative was a government unable to function under a ruler who could not read the memorials presented to him. The titles made the arrangement legible to the bureaucracy. They told every official where authority rested and whose signature made a decree binding. The succession fell to Li Jie, Gaozong's son by Wu Zhao, who took the temple name Zhongzong. He was 27. He had been crown prince since 679, when his older brother Li Hong had died. The cause of Li Hong's death is recorded differently by different sources. The Zhou Tang Shu records illness. The Ziji Tongjian suggests poisoning, with Wu Zhao as the suspected agent. The evidence does not resolve the question. What is certain is that Li Hong died before he could inherit, and the succession moved to Li Jie. Li Hong had been the eldest son and the designated heir for over 2 decades. He was named crown prince in 656. He died in 675. The sources describe him as a serious student of the classics, and a son who disagreed with his mother on matters of policy. One account records that he interceded on behalf of 2 imprisoned princesses, daughters of Gaozong by other women, and that Wu Zhao resented the intervention. Whether that resentment led to his death is a question the sources do not answer. What the sources do establish is that Li Hong died before Gaozong, and that his death opened the succession to his younger brothers. The death of an adult crown prince was a rare event. The Tang succession had been stable for 3 generations because each heir had survived to inherit. Li Hong's death broke that pattern. The crown prince had been a functioning part of the government. He had duties. He had supporters. His removal left a gap that the court could not fill quickly. The years between Li Hong's death and Gaozong's own death in 683 saw a succession of heirs named, suspected, and replaced. The instability was structural. An emperor whose heir dies before him leaves the court without a clear future. An empress who controls the succession benefits from every change. Each new heir owed his position not to birth order alone, but to the decision of the woman who placed him there. The importance of Li Hong's death extended beyond the immediate succession. It shaped the crisis that followed Gaozong's own death 8 years later. If Li Hong had lived, the succession would have passed to an adult crown prince with 2 decades of preparation. The court would have had a clear heir. Wu Zhao would have been dowager empress to a son who had his own political base and his own advisors. Instead, the heir who took the throne in 683 was a man who had been crown prince for only 4 years. He had no independent political base. He had no network of officials loyal to him rather than to his mother. The fragility of Li Jie's position was a direct consequence of Li Hong's death. The demotion that followed his 54-day reign was possible because no faction at court had an interest in defending a crown prince with no deep roots. Li Jie's reign lasted 54 days. The sources record that he attempted to promote the father of his wife, Empress Wei, to a position of power that would have given the Wei family political influence at court. Wu Zhao objected. The promotion threatened the balance of power that she had spent 2 decades building. She demoted Li Jie to Prince of Luling and replaced him with his younger brother Li Dan, who took the temple name Ruizong. Li Dan was placed on the throne, but never given power. He was a puppet. The sources record that he was kept in a separate palace and not permitted to participate in government. Wu Zhao ruled as regent, in the name of an emperor who did not govern. The arrangement was formally within the bounds of the system. A dowager empress could serve as regent for a minor or unsuitable emperor. The precedent existed, but Li Dan was not a minor, and the system knew he was not governing. The regency was a legal fiction that allowed Wu Zhao to exercise power without claiming it in her own name. For the next 7 years, from 684 to 690, Wu Zhao ruled as Dowager Empress. She appointed and dismissed officials. She directed military campaigns. She managed the fiscal system. She received foreign envoys. She did everything an emperor did. She did not hold the title. The gap between what she did and what she was called became the central political problem of the period. The Tang court had a system for recognizing authority. The system recognized the title, not the function. An official who performed the duties of a minister without holding the title was not a minister. An empress who performed the duties of an emperor without holding the title was not an emperor. The system did not care about competence. It cared about designation. The solution Wu Zhao chose was to change the designation. In the 9th month of 690, after a campaign of petitions from officials, Buddhist leaders, and court factions, Wu Zhao accepted the throne and proclaimed the Zhou dynasty. She took the title Sheng Shen Huangdi, Holy and Divine Emperor. The Tang was formally interrupted. The Li clan was displaced. The dynasty that had ruled for 72 years was suspended, and a new one, named after the ancient Zhou, took its place. The proclamation was not a surprise. The petition campaign that preceded it was likely orchestrated, though the degree of genuine support among the officials is not recoverable. What is clear is that Wu Zhao had spent the years between 684 and 690 building the ideological and institutional basis for the transition. She did not simply seize the title. She created the conditions under which the court could offer it to her. The ideological basis came from Buddhism. The Tang court had a complex relationship with the Buddhist establishment. Monasteries held land, received patronage, and exercised political influence. Buddhist texts provided a vocabulary of universal kingship that was distinct from the Confucian vocabulary of hereditary legitimacy. The concept of the wheel-turning king, the Chakravartin, was a Buddhist model of a righteous ruler who governed by moral authority rather than lineage. The concept of Maitreya, the future Buddha, provided a framework for a new era of just rule. Wu Zhao's supporters used both. They identified her with the wheel-turning king and with the Maitreya prophecy, constructing a Buddhist justification for a female emperor that the Confucian system could not have provided. The institutional basis came from the changes Wu Zhao had made to the bureaucracy during the Two Sages period. She had expanded the civil service examination system, increasing the number of candidates tested and promoting officials from less aristocratic backgrounds. She had personally interviewed successful candidates, a practice that created a direct relationship between the ruler and the promoted official. She had introduced new examination categories and reorganized the bureaucracy in ways that weakened the old aristocratic networks and created a body of officials whose careers depended on her continued rule. The officials who owed their positions to the examination system had a practical interest in the survival of the ruler who had promoted them. If the Tang was restored and the old aristocratic networks returned to dominance, the examination-promoted officials would lose their positions. Their loyalty to Wu Zhao was not only ideological, it was structural. They supported her because the system she had built was the system that employed them. The reform carried two motivations that the sources document side by side. The first was administrative. The bureaucracy of a growing empire needed more officials than the aristocratic networks could supply. The old recruitment channels drew from families whose qualification was lineage rather than competence. Wu Zhao opened the examinations wider. She drew from a broader pool. She interviewed candidates in person. She created new categories of examination to match the administrative needs of an expanding state. The Jinshi degree, which tested literary and policy composition, became the dominant pathway to office during her period of influence. The number of candidates who passed each year rose. The pool of eligible officials grew. The second motivation was political. An official promoted through the examination owed his position to the system that tested him and the ruler who expanded that system. He did not owe it to family connection or aristocratic patronage. His loyalty ran to the institution and to the person who controlled the institution. The old aristocratic families held their positions through networks of marriage and recommendation that existed independent of the throne. The examination graduates held theirs through a credential issued by the throne. The difference was structural. A minister from the Chui or Lu clan could survive a change of ruler because his family would still recommend him. A minister who passed the examination under Wu Zhao's expanded system had no family network to fall back on. His career existed only because the current ruler had made it possible. Both motivations operated together. The reform was genuine, and it was strategic. The sources record the meritocratic language and the political calculation in the same documents. Neither explanation reduces the other. The Confucian historiographical tradition that wrote the histories after the Tang was restored, called the Zhou Dynasty an illegitimate usurpation. This is a political judgment, not a neutral description. The Zhou dynasty existed for 15 years. It governed the empire. It issued decrees, collected taxes, appointed officials, and conducted military operations. Whether it was legitimate depends on the criteria used to evaluate legitimacy. By the criterion of effective governance, it was legitimate. By the criterion of hereditary succession through the male line of the Li clan, it was not. The sources, compiled after the Tang restoration, use the latter criterion. The narration must note this without adopting it as its own. The period of Zhou rule was also a period of systematic political violence. The instrument of that violence was the secret police system Wu Zhao established to purge opponents. The key figures were Lai Junchen and Zhou Xing, officials whose role was to investigate, interrogate, and eliminate suspected enemies of the regime. Lai Junchen compiled a manual known as the Manual of Accusation, a guide to the techniques of framing, interrogation, and confession extraction. The manual is attested in bibliographic records from the period, but the full text does not survive. What survives are descriptions in the Tang histories of how the system operated. Informants were encouraged to denounce officials. The accused were interrogated under conditions designed to produce confession. The penalties for conviction were execution, exile, or confiscation of property. The purges targeted the Tang royal family, the Li clan, senior officials from the old establishment, and military leaders whose loyalty was uncertain. The informant system operated through a network of receivers placed in the capital and the provinces. Anyone could submit a denunciation. The system encouraged it. The documents were presented directly to the throne, bypassing the regular judicial bureaucracy that might have filtered or questioned them. An accusation carried more weight than a defense. The accused who confessed under interrogation received a sentence. The accused who resisted received a longer one. Lai Junchen and Zhou Xing built their careers on the reliability with which they produced confessions. Their methods were physical. The sources describe beating, restriction, and deprivation. They were also procedural. The Manual of Accusation, attested in the bibliographic records of the period, provided a framework for constructing charges that would hold under the system's own rules. The full text does not survive. What survives are the descriptions in the Tang histories of the techniques the manual taught. The categories of people targeted followed a clear pattern. The first were the Tang royal family, the Li clan members whose bloodline gave them a claim to the throne Wu Zhao occupied. The second were senior officials from the old establishment, men whose families had served the Tang for generations and whose loyalty to a new dynasty was assumed to be absent. The third were military leaders whose loyalty was uncertain, commanders whose forces could be turned against the throne if they chose. The pattern was not random. The purges removed the people whose position made them a structural threat to a female sovereign from a non-ruling clan. The purges also sent a message. An official who watched his colleague dragged away understood what the boundaries were. The climate of fear was not an accident. It was the instrument. The system had a built-in expiration. The informants who rose through denunciation had no skill that survived the end of the terror. Lai Junchen himself was eventually executed. The instrument turned on its own operator. The system consumed the people it employed because their usefulness depended on the continued existence of enemies to accuse. When the enemies ran out, the accusers became the next target. The sources record that Wu Zhao eventually recognized the damage the secret police had done to the functioning of the court. She removed Lai Junchen. She offered pardons to officials who had been accused. She did not dismantle the system entirely, but she reduced its scale. The terror had served its purpose. The old establishment had been broken. What remained was a court of officials who owed their positions to the woman who had cleared the way for them. The scale of the purges is documented, but imprecisely measured. The sources record hundreds of executions, over the period from 684 to approximately 697. The exact number is not recoverable. The sources vary in their counts and may exaggerate, given the hostile editorial stance of the later historians. What is certain is that the purges were systematic, that they removed a significant portion of the old Tang establishment, and that they created a climate of fear at court. The violence was the cost of holding a throne the existing power structure considered illegitimate. The Tang royal family had governed the empire for 3 generations. The old aristocratic families had held positions of influence for centuries. The military establishment had commanders whose loyalty was to the Li clan, not to a woman who had taken the throne in her own name. Zhao could not remove all of them by administrative means. She could not promote enough examination candidates to fill every position. She could not rely on the loyalty of officials whose careers she had not built. The purge was the mechanism by which she removed the people the system could not accommodate. The contradiction at the heart of the Zhou period is that the same ruler who governed through denunciation and execution also governed through meritocratic reform and administrative competence. The civil service examination system was expanded during the Zhou. Officials from non-aristocratic backgrounds were promoted to positions of responsibility. The bureaucracy was reorganized to improve efficiency. Military campaigns were conducted successfully. The empire remained stable. The administration functioned. Both sets of facts are documented. Neither cancels the other. A ruler who purges opponents through secret police and promotes talent through examinations is not a contradiction the modern mind needs to resolve. It is a description of how power was maintained in a system that had no precedent for a female sovereign. The violence and the reform served the same purpose. They both secured her position. The violence removed enemies. The reform created dependence. Together, they built a political base that could sustain a dynasty the old establishment had not been asked to approve. The two policies were not in tension in the way a later reader might expect. They served the same function from opposite ends. The examinations built a core of officials who could not exist without the new dynasty. The secret police removed the officials who could not be converted to it. One created loyalty. The other eliminated disloyalty. A throne that rested only on promoted talent would have faced the old aristocracy intact. A throne that rested only on terror would have had no one competent left to govern. Zhao used both, because either alone was insufficient. The sources that condemn the purges also record the competence of the administrators she promoted. The sources that praise the reforms also document the executions that cleared the path for them. The same record holds both. The Tang historians who wrote after the Restoration had a reason to emphasize the violence and to minimize the reform. The violence could be attributed to the usurper. The reform could be attributed to the Tang system that preceded her. But the examination expansion is documented during her period of influence, not before it. The purges are documented during her rule, not after it. Both belong to the same administration. Both were directed by the same ruler. The contradiction is a description of how power was maintained, not a judgment on the character of the person who maintained it. The violence and the reform were not phases, they ran concurrently. The same years that saw the examination system expanded saw the purges conducted. The same administration that promoted a talented official from an obscure family ordered the execution of a minister from an old one. The Tang historians wrote from a position that had already decided the Zhou was illegitimate. Their task was to explain how a woman came to hold a throne the system did not intend for her. The violence provided one explanation. The reform provided another. Both were real. The woman who ordered both was neither the pure meritocrat of one story nor the pure tyrant of the other. She was a ruler who used the tools the system offered and the tools she invented to hold a position the system had never designed for anyone to hold. But the system had a limit that violence and reform could not overcome. The limit was the succession. The Zhou dynasty, like every Chinese dynasty, needed an heir. Wu Zhao had sons. They were Li clan members, not Wu clan members. If she named a son as heir, the succession would return to the Li clan, and the Zhou would last one generation. If she named a nephew from the Wu family, the Zhou could continue, but a nephew had no ritual obligation to worship his aunt in the ancestral temple. The argument that resolved the succession is recorded in the Ziji Tongjian. The official Di Guiyuan told Wu Zhao that a son would worship his mother in the ancestral temple, as custom required. A nephew would worship his own parents. If Wu Zhao named her nephew, no one would perform the rituals that connected the dead to the living. The argument was not about politics. It was about ritual. The Tang ritual system, derived from Confucian ancestor worship, required that sacrifices to the dead be performed by blood descendants. A nephew was not a descendant. A son was. Wu Zhao had spent 15 years trying to create a dynasty outside the Confucian system. The succession question forced her back inside it. She could not name an heir without accepting the system's rules. The system's rules said the heir had to be a son. A son belonged to the Li clan. The Zhou would end with her. The ritual logic operated at a level beneath politics. Ancestor worship was not a metaphor. It was the structure that connected the dead to the living and the living to the lineage. A person who died without a descendant to perform the sacrifices became a hungry ghost, uncared for in the afterlife. The fear was concrete. The system made the consequences of a wrong succession cosmological, not merely political. A nephew belonged to his father's lineage. His obligation was to worship his own parents and his own ancestors. He had no ritual duty to an aunt. An aunt was not an ancestor. The patrilineal descent system that organized every family in the empire made the succession question unanswerable within Wu Zhao's lifetime on her own terms. She could create a dynasty. She could not create a descent line that ran through a woman. The system recognized sons, not nephews through aunts. Di Guiyuan's argument was not an opinion. It was a description of the rule that no one had the authority to change, including the Empress who held the throne. The rule of patrilineal descent was older than the Tang. It was older than the Zhou. It was older than any dynasty that had ruled the empire. It organized inheritance, ritual obligation, and the transmission of name and property in every household from the peasant to the throne. Wu Zhao had overturned many things. She had not overturned this. She could not. The system she had spent her career escaping had drawn a line she could not cross, and the line was drawn in the architecture of the family itself. She made the decision the system required. In 698, she recalled Li Zhe, the son she had demoted to Prince of Luling 14 years earlier, and named him Crown Prince. The Zhou dynasty would continue only for her lifetime. The heir was a Li. The restoration was written into the succession. The system she had spent her career escaping had won the one battle she could not fight. She could take the throne. She could change the dynasty's name. She could create a new ideological justification. She could purge the old establishment and promote a new one. She could not change the rule of descent. The rule of descent was older than any dynasty. It said that a child belonged to the father's lineage. She had no power to change this. She had only the power to choose which son would succeed her. The son she chose carried the name of the dynasty she had replaced. She held the highest title the system offered. The system offered it to no one like her again, and the system demanded she name a successor from the family she had replaced. The instrument of terror consumed itself. In 697, Lai Junchen, the official who had built the secret police system and directed the purges that had removed hundreds of enemies from the court, was himself accused. The accusation came from the same system he had created. An informant denounced him. The interrogation that followed used the methods he had perfected. He was executed. The denunciation that destroyed Lai Junchen came from within the system he had built. The source's name, Wei Jingxi, and other officials who had survived the purges by learning how the mechanism worked. The accusation was not a sudden reversal. It was the logic of the system completing itself. Lai Junchen had spent a decade teaching the court that accusation was sufficient evidence. The court that had accepted that teaching could not refuse it when it was turned against him. He was accused and interrogated. He confessed, or was made to confess. He was executed with his family, and the instrument had consumed its maker. Before his fall, Lai Junchen had compiled a manual. The sources call it the Manual of Accusation. The bibliography of the Tang era records the work under his name. The full text does not survive. What survives is the testimony of contemporaries who described its contents. They listed the manual's sections as methods for framing officials, scripts for interrogation, and classifications of suspect types. The manual was a practical document. It treated denunciation as a craft that could be taught and learned. Its existence explains how the secret police produced results so reliably that accusations became, for a time, indistinguishable from verdicts. The officials who read it, or who learned its methods, did not need evidence. They needed a name and a charge. The irony was structural and built into the system itself. The same manual that had taught officials whom to accuse could not protect its author from being accused. The same classification of suspect types that had identified enemies of the Zhou identified Lai Junchen as one when the balance shifted. He had been the system's most skilled operator. He became its most prominent victim. Wu Zhao did not intervene. The purge had done what she required. The man who had run it had become a liability, a figure whose continued presence reminded the court of the terror it had endured. She let the system process him, as he had processed others. The execution was public, and the message was clear. The system did not depend on any single man. The fall of Lai Junchen did not end the practice of denunciation. It ended the period in which denunciation was the state's principal instrument. The officials who had been accused under his system were not all rehabilitated. Some had been guilty of genuine opposition. Others had been victims of convenience. The system could not sort them after the fact. The court moved on, and the cases were not reopened. The records of the secret police were not destroyed. They remained in the archives as the documentation of what the Zhou had done to secure itself, and as the evidence that the security had cost. The purges did not end with Lai Junchen's death, but they became less systematic. The climate of fear that had sustained the Zhou dynasty's first decade began to ease. Officials who had served in silence began to speak. The court that had been governed by denunciation started to recover the capacity for disagreement that administration requires. The removal of Lai Junchen was not a reform, but a correction. The system of terror had served its purpose. The old Tang establishment had been broken. The officials who replaced it owed their positions to Wu Zhao. The military commanders who remained had been tested for loyalty. The purge had done what it was designed to do. Once the threat it addressed was reduced, the instrument could be discarded. Wu Zhao did not dismantle the secret police, but simply stopped feeding it the volume of victims it had been built to process. By the end of the 690s, Wu Zhao was in her late 70s. The sources describe a woman who remained intellectually active but physically diminished. She could still read memorials and make decisions, but the energy that had sustained the administrative machine for 3 decades was fading. The court that had depended on her capacity to process information and issue orders was beginning to outpace her. Into the gap left by her declining energy came the Zhang brothers. Zhang Yiji and Zhang Changzong were young men, described in the sources as handsome and accomplished in music and the arts, who gained access to the aging Empress and became her favorites. The sources, compiled by officials who viewed the sexual dimension with hostility, describe the relationship in terms that emphasize its impropriety. The degree of political influence the Zhang brothers exercised is a matter the sources present in the worst possible light. What the evidence supports is narrower than the sources claim. The Zhang brothers controlled access to the Empress. In a court where influence flowed through proximity to the ruler, the person who controlled access controlled the gate. The Zhang brothers became that gate. Officials who wanted to see Wu Zhao, to present memorials, to request appointments, or to influence decisions, had to pass through them. The sources record that the brothers accepted gifts, made appointments, and interfered in administrative decisions. The specific claims are colored by the source's hostility to the sexual relationship, but the structural fact is clear. The aging ruler's favorites had become a bottleneck between the court and the sovereign. The sources compiled after the Tang Restoration describe the Zhang brothers in language designed to discredit. They are called sycophants, corruptors, and worse. The sexual relationship is presented as the root of the political problem. This framing is a characteristic of the sources, not a neutral account. The compilers had reason to emphasize the impropriety. A woman ruler's favorites were easier to condemn than her competence. The brothers' influence could be blamed on her decline. Her competence could be left unmentioned. The narrative the sources built placed the favorites at the center and the sovereign's judgment at the margin. What the sources document, beneath the editorial framing, is more limited and more specific. The brothers were young men, accomplished in music and the literary arts. They gained access to an aging ruler who could no longer process the volume of business the court generated each day. They used that access to mediate between the sovereign and the officials. The mediation gave them influence over appointments, over the flow of memorials, and over the timing of decisions. That influence is documented in the sources themselves. The color the sources add, the emphasis on impropriety and corruption, is editorial. The structural problem was not the sexual relationship. The structural problem was the bottleneck. An aging ruler who controlled access through favorites produced a court where influence flowed through two young men rather than through the bureaucratic channels the examination system had created. The officials who had risen on merit resented the favorites, not because of the favorites' morals, but because the favorites had inserted themselves between merit and power. The military commanders who had served the Zhou found their requests filtered through men whose interests were personal. The resentment was about access, though the sources made it about sex. The distinction matters because the structural problem would recur whenever a ruler's capacity declined and access became a resource controlled by someone other than the sovereign. The court resented them. The resentment was not only about the sexual relationship, it was about power. The officials who had been promoted through the examination system, who owed their careers to Zhao, found their access to the ruler mediated by two young men whose qualifications were not administrative. The military commanders who had served the Zhou found their requests filtered through favorites whose interests were personal, not institutional. The resentment built for years. In the first month of the first year of Shenlong, which corresponds to February 705, the resentment broke. 5 senior officials, Zhang Jianji, Cui Xuanwei, Jing Hui, Huan Yanfan, and Yuan Shuji, conspired with the general Li Duozuo to seize the palace. They were supported by the crown prince Li Xian, Wu Zhao's grandson, who had been named heir after Li Zhe's recall. The coup was swift. The conspirators stormed the palace with the troops Li Duozuo commanded. They killed the Zhang brothers at the corridor entrance. Then they entered Wu Zhao's chamber. She was 81 years old and seriously ill. She was unable to resist. The conspirators presented her with the demand that she abdicate in favor of Li Zhe, Zhongzong, the son she had demoted to Prince of Luling and then recalled as crown prince. She abdicated, and the Tang was restored. Li Zhe, now Zhongzong, returned to the throne he had lost 54 days into his first reign, 22 years earlier. The 5 conspirators who staged the coup were rewarded immediately. Zhang Jianji was given the title of prince. Cui Xuanwei, Jing Hui, Huan Yanfan, and Yuan Shuji received senior posts and military commands. The restoration they had effected was presented as the return of legitimate rule. The general Li Duozhuo, whose troops had made the coup possible, was also promoted. The crown prince, Li Xian, who had lent his name and support to the conspiracy, was confirmed as heir. The settlement held for a moment. Within a few years, the same men were dead or exiled. Empress Wei, Zhang's wife, had watched Wu Zhao govern for decades. She had learned that the throne could be held by a woman if the woman controlled the court and the access to it. She began to build the same kind of control her mother-in-law had built. The 5 conspirators stood in her way. They were men of the coup, not men of her faction. One by one they were removed. Zhang Jianxi died in exile. Cui Xuanwei died in exile. Jing Hui died in exile. Huan Yanfan died in exile. Yuan Shuji died in exile. The men who had restored the Tang were purged by the wife of the emperor they had restored. The irony was documented, not editorialized by later writers. The conspirators had used force to return the throne to the Li clan. The Li clan emperor's wife then used the throne they had given him to destroy them. Empress Wei sought the same prize Wu Zhao had sought. She did not succeed. In 710, she was herself killed in a second palace coup. The pattern the Zhou had established, that power could be seized and held through control of the palace, persisted after the Zhou was erased from the record. The crown prince Li Xian did not live to inherit what the conspirators had secured. He died before Gaozong. The succession the 5 men had risked their lives to guarantee did not follow the path they intended. The Tang they restored entered its own period of instability, driven by women who had watched Wu Zhao and drawn their own conclusions about what was possible. The Zhou dynasty lasted 15 years and produced no second emperor. Its only ruler was the woman who had been a timber merchant's daughter, a 5th-rank concubine, a monastery nun, a 2nd-rank consort, an empress, a co-ruler, a regent, and finally a sovereign in her own name. When it ended, the system returned the title it had always preferred. She was no longer Shengshen Huangdi. She was Zetian Huangho, Empress Zetian. Wu Zhao died in the 11th month of 705, approximately 9 months after her abdication. The sources record that she was 81 years old by Chinese reckoning, which counts the year of birth as age 1. She was buried at Qianling, the tomb complex she had built for Gaozong and herself. The burial joined her with the husband whose illness had given her the desk and whose death had given her the throne. The mound that held them both was carved into the side of Mount Liang. The spirit road that led to it was lined with stone figures. At the end of the road stood 2 steles. One was inscribed, one was not. Qianling stood 80 kilometers northwest of the Tang capital, on the ridge of Mount Liang. The complex followed the plan the Tang had developed for imperial tombs. A gateway opened onto the spirit road. The road led to the tomb mound cut into the mountainside. The figures that lined the road included winged horses, ostriches carved in relief, officials in court dress, and lions. The scale was large. The work was in stone. The figures marked the approach to the burial. The spirit road at Qianling was long. The figures along it were arranged in pairs. The nearer figures were animals. The farther figures were human. The arrangement reproduced the order of a court audience. The animals stood where the imperial stables would have stood. The officials stood where the courtiers would have stood. The approach to the tomb mirrored the approach to the throne. The dead sovereign was received the way the living sovereign had been received. The court that ordered the figures did not distinguish between the two. The joint burial was unusual. Imperial couples were sometimes buried in paired tombs, each with its own mound and its own road. The single chamber at Qianling placed husband and wife together under one mound. The arrangement reflected the way they had ruled. Gaozong had been emperor in name. Zhao had been emperor in fact. The tomb joined them as the reign had joined them. After the restoration, the court accepted the burial. It did not disturb it. The son who had taken the throne from her allowed her to remain beside the husband whose throne she had held. Qianling is the only Tang imperial tomb that survived without large-scale looting. The other Tang tombs were opened and robbed, some in the decades after the dynasty fell, some later. The tombs of the emperors who ruled before and after Zhao were emptied. Qianling was cut into the mountainside. The rock and the location made entry difficult. The tomb that holds Zhao is also the tomb that protected her. The mound was never breached. The contents were never scattered. The burial she shares with Gaozong is the burial that endures. The inscribed stele was the one she had written for Gaozong. It recorded his accomplishments in the language the system provided for dead emperors. The uninscribed stele was the one left for her. No text was carved. No eulogy was composed. No official record explains why. The explanations that have been offered are all inferential. Some scholars suggest that Zhao herself ordered the stele left blank as a final statement that no inscription could encompass what she had done. Others suggest that Gaozong could not decide whether to praise the mother who had deposed him or condemn the woman who had usurped the Tang, and left the decision to time. Still others suggest that the later Tang court, which had every reason to minimize the Zhou interlude, chose silence as the most effective form of erasure. None of these explanations is supported by a surviving document. The blankness is the only fact. Every reason is a guess. The stone stands at Qianling because someone decided it should stand there, and no one decided what to write on it, and no one since has been able to agree. It was not a symbol, but a stone. It is 8 meters tall. It was placed on a tomb avenue. It was meant to carry an inscription, and it does not. The blankness is not eloquent or mysterious, but simply empty. The emptiness is the only thing the evidence supports. But the emptiness is also the only honest response the system could make to what Zhao did. She entered the palace through a door that depended on a man. She ended her life as the only person in Chinese history who opened that door from the inside. The system that placed her there had no language for what she became. The Confucian tradition called her an anomaly. The Buddhist tradition called her a wheel-turning king. The Tang Restoration called her an empress. The Zhou she founded called her an emperor. None of these names is the one the stele carries, because the stele carries no name at all. She ruled the largest empire on earth for 15 years. She expanded the examination system, reorganized the bureaucracy, conducted successful military campaigns, and maintained administrative stability across a domain that stretched from Korea to the borders of Persia. She also purged hundreds of officials through a secret police system that used denunciation, interrogation, and execution as instruments of political control. Both sets of facts are documented. Neither cancels the other. The woman who promoted merit was the same woman who deployed terror. The system she built used both, because both served the same purpose: securing a position the system had not designed for anyone like her. The succession she was forced to accept returned the throne to the Li clan. The son she named Heir became the emperor who restored the Tang. The dynasty she founded was erased from the official chronology. The title she held was reduced to the one the system had always preferred for women: Empress, not emperor. The word huangdi, which she had carried for 15 years, was taken back and never given to another woman. The Tang continued after her death. The dynasty she had interrupted lasted another 200 years. The examination system she had expanded continued to develop under the restored dynasty and under the dynasties that followed it. The bureaucratic practices she had institutionalized, the registration of households, the rotation of officials, the use of memorials, persisted in the administration that came after. The court that erased her name kept the machinery she had built. The restoration did not undo her work. It undid only her title and her dynasty. The officials who staffed the restored Tang used the procedures that Zhou had refined. The system survived the name change. The word huangdi named a sovereign. The word huangho named a consort. The difference was the difference between ruling and serving. Wu Zhao had ruled. The restoration declared that she had served. The chronology was adjusted to match. The years of her reign were counted as years of the Tang, with the interruption noted as a deviation. The deviation lasted 15 years. The correction lasted longer than the deviation. The Tang records carried the correction forward. The precedent she set was never repeated. No woman in the more than 1,200 years of imperial history that followed held the title of emperor in her own name. Empress Wei tried and failed. Other women reached positions of influence behind the throne in the centuries that followed. None took the throne itself. The system that had produced Wu Zhao closed the door she had opened. The precedent stood as a warning rather than an example. The dynasty that erased her from the chronology made certain that no second woman would need to be erased. The blank stele at Qianling stands where it was placed. The stone figures on the spirit road face it. The tomb mound behind it holds two bodies, and the avenue is open while the inscription is absent. The stone does not explain, does not accuse, and does not praise. It carries nothing, because nothing was the only text the system could agree on. The woman who filled every position the system offered and invented one it had not was left with a monument that says nothing, in a language no one had to read, on a stone no one had to carve. The first position she held was cairen, Lady of Talents, 5th rank. The last position she held was Zetian Huangho, Empress Zetian. Between those two titles, She held every rank the system offered to a woman, and one rank the system had never offered to anyone. The stone at Qianling does not list them. It stands blank, because no one could compose an inscription that the others would accept. The blankness is the fact. The reason is not in the record. The archive goes no further, and neither should the story.